remember the financial mechanism to be able to implement DRR and resilience action plans. Often of the finance we have is the finance the municipality has. So project financing, service financing, tax is the income. So it is usually not the case that you have extra financing for resilience only. You have to think about how you use your money resiliently. And that's why the resilience strategy is so important. When we look into the financial challenges of local authorities, of course, we can see in particular in your region, there are huge differences in the financing mechanism available and the finances available. No, so I think you can bring this up yourself and when you make contributions. But we have as UCLG, we always look on how the financing share of local governments is. And in Asia, we have some local governments only spending 5% of public budgets, others spend 15%. Many of the local governments are totally underfunded for the duties and the services they have to deliver. So these are big challenges that we cannot escape. So we can't understand resilience as an additional burden or as an additional anchor. We have to anchor it into the local strategies and find from there the challenges and opportunities. Of course, we see the cost of doing nothing. This we find really a good sentence, because often when you see also looking into the game, those who were choosing options that did not contribute to resilience, and this is the case in real life, often later say, oh, now I haven't done anything and my money, which I have now, is not the same as if I would have invested it 10 years ago. No? Because of one point is, of course, financial devaluation, but moreover, is that if you have a crisis and you don't attack the crisis, if you have an environmental change, you don't attack that, you don't do something to stop, the challenge gets bigger over time. And that is actually the big burden for the future. So when we look on the cost where the funding comes from, the first funding is intergovernmental fiscal transfer. So it is taxes, it is how the public budget is distributed in the different government level. Then how, which departments have funding, no? So we often see resilience is anchored in environmental departments that have very limited funding, while infrastructure funding is larger funding of the cities. So we need to have an integrated strategy also, because if not, we cannot really finance actions. The incentives for homeowners and business, this means if I do funding with the private sector. The private sector is, for example, a homeowner or an enterprise, and I bring them to be more resilient. I have made a lot more out of the funding I have, no? Because they, of course, finance the main development, the main urban development. The community-driven finance mechanism, this means it's more about decision-making, like in our game. If you are imposing or if you consider the ideas of others, because then you might also find other sources, not only financial sources, but also working sources or commitments. The same mobilization of the private sector and the compensatory risk management. So this means to look a little bit on who is causing my stress and my risk. This is very often the case. For example, yesterday we were looking at Yogyakarta, a city in Indonesia that has a big problem in the river. But of course, the one polluting the river is the upstream city. And the downstream city always suffer a dirty river, a river that has not has very high peaks and is a risk for flooding, because in the upper river fields everything is urbanized. So of course there is no swamp areas. And this is to see the cities as a system, and then to think about compensation of the ones who increase the risk. For example, if I do a sports field which is able to catch water, or if I do a sport field which is just closing the soil so the water runs away. And finally, the risk insurance, which is a big mechanism, in particular, very important for governments. And there is because in a moment of disaster, then you have a financial possibility. If we look on the incentives after the disaster of COVID-19, I just give you an example of my own country in Germany. With this country, all the time talks on finance, a politician. And I can just make the difference with Spain, that we don't talk much on finance there. Every day it's on financing. So how big are the losses? And this made that the municipalities very, very early claim that they have to get the big share of the COVID recovery funding, which is very high in Europe. The European Union is financing a big recovery pack of 700 milliards, so billion. So the municipalities have very quickly said, okay, we are losing the transport. We pay transport because nobody is using. So we are losing all the incomes. We have to support so many small business. And they showed very quickly that they need this recovery funding in the municipal budget, in particular to guarantee services. Another example is Canadian municipalities. They also were very quick. And this is important because this is a role of association. They really very quickly say, hey, government, this is what we are losing. You need to not plan without us. We already have the figures. And then the other part is, of course, in financing in the moment of disaster. And also this is like COVID. I don't know actually how it is in Asia, or it would be nice to listen, for example, China, what they did. But when you have a larger disaster, of course, funding is also available. Like in this moment here in Europe, we live that the municipalities have theoretically funding available to do resilience action, but because of these European windows that are opening up. But this is, of course, always linked to the recovery, and again, not resilience. Resilience funding is, of course, always a mix. So if we look on project and processes, this is another example of Santa Fe. This is not only a province, it is also a city in Argentina. And they did like small improvement. This is very common in Latin America. You do an improvement, for example, on public space. You build some swamp areas. You make them. They did systems for water capture, and this with a municipal ordinance. They provide incentives for developers for investing in public devices to retard water runoff. So that's like what I said before in the sport fields. And of course, if you have a developer, you can say, hey, we cannot have all this only asphalt. We need to have another solution. You need to not only have social responsibility, you need to have green areas and so on, which compensate and increase my resilience level. In Mexico, the same. This was to mobilize the resources of the private sector, as I said, so that incorporate climate proofing in investments calculation prior to the construction for companies. This is something that we get more and more, the green funding, the climate points, the bonds. This is just, we calculate more the cost of environmental services, and by this you get the opportunity to address climate change through that calculating possible damages, market shocks, and you do new regulation and policies. In Turkey, for example, this was on the insurance, the last point here on resilience financing. The point, of course, is the purpose is to ensure that all property tax-paying dwellings had an earthquake insurance cover. So, for example, if we build up a new neighborhood, or if there is installment, you can also insure infrastructure, you can insure highways. This reduces, in that case, it was for private dwellings, and they reduce the government fiscal exposure to the impact of earthquake, because of course, if you have an insurance, the government will not be the one who has funded, but to fund the recovery, it is insurance. The transfer catastrophe risk to the international reinsurance market. So you take this international insurance market into your calculation, encourage physical risk mitigation through insurance. And of course, finally, what happens is that the government invested heavily in insurance awareness campaigns and made earthquake insurance compulsory for homeowners in urban areas, and is also now compulsory for mortgage seekers and flat house purchasers. So if you can imagine this, if everybody need to have an insurance together with a building license, this means that if there is an earthquake or if there is a damage, the insurance comes and pays the damages in the best of the cases. And this is, of course, something the government can envisage. But again, here, insurance are private-oriented investment systems. So, of course, in the end, what they pay, when you look carefully at what they pay and what you have to pay, it's not necessarily the most fair way. But it is important, maybe here also for the government to not only encourage insurance, but also diversify insurance so that you have competing insurances.